that's really fascinating to deconstruct and unpack as well. Like, what is it about a pair of people that causes them to go in this spiral versus another partnership that doesn't do the same thing? And I think that these tools require a certain amount of willingness to be able to break that pattern. And that's something that not everybody is willing to do. And so I hope and encourage all of you out there listening to, take a breath when you're in these situations, and we'll get more into some of that. But it can be really difficult to move past a pattern because that's all that you know.
Welcome to the Multiamory podcast. I'm Jace.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Dedeker.
We believe in looking to the future of relationships, not maintaining the status quo of the past.
Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, swinging, casually dating, or if you just do relationships differently, we see you, and we're here for you.
Things I know I did, forcing me to form myself to fit.
On this episode of the Multiamory podcast, we're talking about how to stop a conflict spiral. You might be at the end of your rope with a partner, you've raised voices, you've said things you wish you hadn't said, you've reached a point in the argument where you know it's no longer productive. You're exhausted and you just want things to be over with, but you have no idea how to stop. You don't even know how to start crawling back to your partner. How do you ever get close again without getting pulled back into a fight? How do you come back together if you're feeling hurt or feeling ashamed? Today, we are going to talk about how to get the spiral to stop, how to soothe yourself, how to come back together to co-regulate, and how to get on track towards repair and reconnection. And we're going to give you 4 steps to take, which will have a beautiful, cool acronym, STAR.
Yeah, a big Multiamory reveal of a new, very Multiamory acronym.
Yeah. And you can be the star of your own conflict spiral.
Your own conflict constellation.
I love that. Yes. Okay. So in this episode, we are going to be referencing several of our other tools that we've created in the past. If you would like to learn more about those, you can check out those tools as well as many others in our book, Multiamory: Essential Tools for Modern Relationships, which covers our most used communication tools for all types of relationships. You can find links to buy it at multiamory.com/book or wherever fine books are sold. Also, you can check back through our back catalog or check out our first 9 episodes where we cover some of our most commonly referenced episodes.
So I want to hear from the two of you about your experiences with bad conflict spirals. Particularly, I'm curious to know, when you went through any kind of bad conflict spirals with a partner, did it tend to be like one-offs, like there wasn't a ton of conflict in the relationship, but then like when you would get into conflict, it would be like really intense and cyclical and last a long time? Or was this more likely to happen in relationships where there's just like a lot of conflict in general?
I feel like I tried to really keep my relationship as conflict-free as possible in my last big relationship, and yet when conflict happened, it was pretty bad and it was pretty intense, and it would often last for a long period of time and sometimes even be brought up like 6 months later as, oh, that was a thing that you did, when I thought that we had kind of gotten past it. But yeah, the conflict spiral thing is really interesting, I think, just because it's so difficult to get out of, especially when you just kind of have a habit as a couple of doing the cyclical spirally thing. And that is the pattern that you get into in your conflict, regardless of what it's really about, is that it becomes this like weird, unfortunate spiral. I feel like, yeah, in my last relationship, that was very, very present, which was too bad.
Yeah, I think that I've experienced it a couple different ways, maybe 3 different ways that are coming to mind.
3 different ways. Wow.
Yeah,
3 different
I'm
flavors.
trying to kind of categorize it, but I think one is usually a relationship where things start fine, usually while you're still in NRE, and then at some point there starts to be this communication mishap that happens, and then it's like everything falls back into that cycle, that conflict cycle of just like getting upset and escalating, and nothing really gets resolved until everyone just kind of burns out, and then you go back to normal for a while until you fall back into it again. I feel like that's kind of one category I've seen or I've experienced, have been in, where I guess that would be the one you kind of described as pretty consistent. It's like the conflict level in general becomes high once that cycle starts.
Yeah.
Whereas I think there's other ones where things are fine most of the time, but then there are like certain topics or certain issues that'll come up now and again that have this tendency where like we just really don't see eye to eye. And it just feels like we both get really upset and nothing really would get resolved, at least not until we eventually found ways to kind of move away from that or approach it from a different angle instead of just kind of hoping the same thing is going to be different this time. And then I guess the third way, which I would say happens in my relationship with you, Dedeker, is where generally I think we're quite good at communicating, but it's like sometimes if one of us, usually one of us, sometimes both of us, but usually one of us is just like in a more, I don't know, fragile place. Like it's just kind of maybe not feeling well. Maybe I'm thinking about that because I've been sick this week. But, you know, like not feeling well or has something else going on in their life that's causing a lot of stress or a lot of anxiety or something like that, that then it's like a conversation that normally wouldn't go there can start to end up in a little bit of that. We're not really getting anywhere. We're maybe switch tracking a little bit, talking about slightly different topics. But I think we are very good at doing the stuff we're going to talk about today, which is kind of stopping sooner than later, right? You know, still it can end up spiraling a little bit, but like stopping soon enough and then giving that space before coming back together. And I think having practiced that more has made that better. Because I think earlier on in our relationship, that spiral would last longer before we would eventually be able to come back from it. Whereas I think that's much faster now.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of interesting things that are sometimes going on in any kind of conflict spiral, as far as like the contributing factors, because in this episode, we're going to get into what the research says about like what are the disparate pieces and behaviors that tend to go into these conflict spirals. And then we're going to get into the kind of the tool for getting out of it. But I didn't do a ton of research on like contributing factors because it's like everyone's relationship is different. Yeah. And many things can contribute to that. But things like you mentioned, like physiological state, how well someone is or isn't managing external stress. I think the stuff like you brought up, Emily, this idea of like, are we pretty avoidant the rest of the time in the relationship, right? And because we're afraid of how bad the conflict gets, so that because it is bad, and so then we avoid it, and then things get talked about, and then it's bad again, right? Or I think, you know, a lot of things that go into it is like physiological arousal as well. Like if one or both of us, if this is a hot button issue or a very triggery issue, that it can be really hard to move past it. Like I've had some clients who shared with me about how what they noticed about their conflict pattern was that they often would end up on the same page, or they often would realize, oh, actually, we want very similar things here. But it's like they still had trouble kind of calming themselves down enough, and they would keep just kind of rehashing the same ground over and over and over again, because even though they like cognitively realized we're on the same page and we want the same thing, there was something in their bodies and their feelings that just wasn't settling. I think that can be a piece here as well.
I feel like when there's long-term external conflict that's causing internal conflict within the relationship, that your capacity to be able to deal with conflict more effectively is lessened. At least like because you're having like a lot of emotional burnout, or if you're having to kind of do the same cycle for a fairly long period of time, even say like a week or a month or something like that, then I feel like that capacity diminishes over time. Maybe at the beginning of the month, you were really like, okay, let's tackle this. Let's figure this out. I'm going to be here for you. And then, you know, if it continues to happen towards the end of the month, you just feel really depleted.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to start out by looking at the research. So my entry point to this was looking at how does the research define quote unquote high conflict or high conflict couples. And I suppose I'm looking at trying to differentiate this from maybe shorter day-to-day disagreements you might have with a partner, or maybe tiny little spats where you get on each other's nerves, but you're able to repair it quickly. Like these are the more sticky things. So most of this information I'm pulling from a study titled Defining High Conflict that was published in the American Journal of Family Therapy in 2010. The study was conducted by Anderson et al. And I'm going to go through this list of clues that you may look out for that may indicate that you are in a conflict spiral or in some sort of cyclical, recurring, unhealthy conflict. And the first clue is pervasiveness, right? So this idea that the conflict just keeps continuing. There's no settling point. There's no resolution point. And this idea that it's maybe not necessarily limited to just one topic, although it could be, but often, conflict spirals are characterized by the fact that like conflict rears its head in many, many different points of disagreement in the relationship, not just one particular hot button issue.
I feel like a way I've seen that play out, though, is where whatever the conflict is about, it kind of gets pulled into the spiral of some other underlying conflict that's maybe deeper underneath it, of like a value disagreement between the two people that they just can't reconcile. And so everything else kind of gets sucked into the whirlpool of that one.
For sure.
So it's like it'll come up in different places, but it's kind of all coming back to similar things. But I guess it can get disguised a little bit in that way, though.
Yeah, for sure. Another clue to look out for are your exchanges primarily characterized by defensiveness, right? So it's like you're moving to protect yourself, or maybe your defense strategy is just avoidance, right? So like shutting a partner down when they want to talk about a topic, or literally leaving the room, or literally leaving them on red, like all the other, behaviors that we incorporate in order to avoid things, or stuff like withdrawal, stonewalling, giving them the silent treatment, or just like not giving them any kind of response to what they're saying to you. Now, this one was interesting. Like, this is specifically drawn from the text of the study. Efforts to control the other before being controlled. And I think that it's interesting that this is roped under the category of defensiveness or defensive behaviors, because it's almost kind of like trying your best defense is good offense sort of approach here, of this idea of like, I need to get the upper hand. I need to get the power here, because I know if I don't, the other person is going to get the upper hand. Like they're going to be right and try to tell me that I'm wrong, or they're going to try to extract an apology from me first, or they're going to try to hold me accountable first. So I need to get in there before they do that.
Yeah, this is something that I feel like Dedeker and you and I have identified as, I think we call it being preemptively mad.
You think that's what preemptively mad is about? Is about trying to control?
Well, because, okay, for some context.
It's part of it.
It's this thing of where, imagine a situation where, you come to your partner to let them know about something that maybe you did a little bit wrong, or that you're worried they're going to be upset about, but you kind of present it like, I'm angry at you. And
wait, are you saying this about me specifically, or the general you?
The general you.
Okay.
Okay.
I figured that he was talking about both of you from the way in which he's presenting.
Yeah, I mean, this is anyone, but us also. Anyone, including us. So the reason why we have this term preemptively mad is actually part of seeing that and finding a kind of a microscript, which you can find out about in our book if you don't already know about that. But having like a microscript to actually help stop those situations from becoming bad, where it's like one person might come in and be like just a little more intense than you would think about something, and the other person goes, whoa, like what's your deal? Why are you being like this? And they're like, oh, sorry, I was being preemptively mad because I expected that you were going to be upset that I hadn't broken down this cardboard box yet, or something like that.
What an
So you're like
example.
jumping the gun on being mad.
It's that defensiveness, right? It's that like, oh, I've got to be self-protective.
Yeah, this preemptive defensiveness.
Yeah,
because I feel like it usually goes down by like, maybe I enter a room and maybe I have something else entirely on my mind, but I'm like a little bit stressed or a little frazzled, right? Or like trying to, I don't know, like get things done before we have to record or something like that. Then Jace might be like a little weirdly snappy or whatever, because I think you're anticipating that I'm going to come after you for something or like be disappointed in you. And I'm like, whoa, why are you snapping? You're like, sorry, I was getting preemptively mad because I assumed
you were going to be mad at me. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess that works out as a pretty good microscript for us.
I think just giving it a label was essentially what
Yes.
served as our microscript to
Yes.
then make it okay to say, I'm sorry, that's not actually what I mean to be doing.
Sure. Yeah. Another thing to look out for that may indicate that you're in a conflict spiral is overall aggression. And the researchers define aggression as like there are attacks that are person-focused rather than issue-focused. This reflects a lot of like what the Gottmans talk about when it comes to things like criticism and critique. To bring up an issue-focused complaint might be, hey, sometimes you tell me that you want to spend more time together, but then there's no follow-up or initiation to making actual plans. And so I want us to talk and figure out how we can make planning dates feel equitable and easy for both of us, right? So it's like we're focusing on the issue, which is that like, you say you want to hang out with me, but then there's no follow-up, right? Versus person-focused, which might be something like, you're so wrapped up in your own world that you completely forget about making plans with me and you expect me to do all the planning because you're disorganized and unfocused. Right. So then it's like I've shifted into the complaint is still the same, essentially, at its heart. But I've shifted into this is because of your failings, because of who you are as a human being, which
Right.
is very hard for someone to just take on the chin if their partner's coming at them like that without being defensive.
I will say it's difficult when you do say it correctly or more issue focused and a person still gets very defensive
Yes.
and turns it into, but you're saying this about me
Yes.
as a human being.
Yes. And that's
Yeah.
another issue.
Yeah, you're moving it into the behavior. That is another issue.
Yeah, that's another issue. And I think that we've covered this a little bit in bits and pieces on other episodes, but like that, I think starts to get into an issue of just the discomfort of dealing with a partner who has a complaint or a partner who's
Right.
asking for something from you or is expressing that they were disappointed or they were hurt by something that you did, which is really hard to deal with. You know, I think if you care about the other person, then it's hard to hear that you disappointed them in some way. And so, yeah, I think that opens up this whole other pathway where even if the other person can say it in all the right ways, it can still freaking hurt. And then some people deal with that hurt in healthy ways and in unhealthy ways.
I've also seen that one especially come up around certain topics that for that person are just, it's too close to something that they're too sensitive about.
Yeah.
So that a criticism, even about a specific action like this, to them lands as more of a personal attack. It's like, I think that the ways I see this happen is usually if a certain behavior for that person is linked with being a bad person. And then if your criticism is, hey, I kind of feel like you're doing this thing that to them is linked to being a bad person, that then more of that defensiveness comes up there, right?
Yeah.
And that, you know, likely has to do with just how they were brought up or what their friend group is like, about who they make fun of, what kinds of behaviors they think are bad, what their parents would talk shit about, you know, whatever it is that kind of got that association in their brain. Like it could be something that could be perceived as being sexist, that maybe for them, they really internalized that means you're a bad, evil person. And so they're going to be extra defensive about that. Or, you know, it could be something about, I don't know, laziness. Like in this example, if it were, oh, you're not planning with me because you're lazy, that maybe they were really brought up with this idea that like lazy people are bad people. And so they're going to have a harder time differentiating themselves from just the behavior that's being criticized or that there's a complaint about. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. I think, again, is one of those whirlpools that can kind of pull you in, is if it kind of like has this magnetic force that sort of pulls other discussions into its whirlpool. I'm mixing up magnets and water dynamics here, but you know, you get what I'm saying.
We get it. Yeah. And that leads us to the next behavior, which is escalation. You know, so as in any behavior, that's the way that I think of it, is as increasing the octane, increasing the temperature of the conversation. So all your classic behaviors like blame, criticism, having a complete lack of empathy, emotional reactivity, falling into this attack and counterattack cycle, right? You know, your partner complains about something about you, and so you have to throw something back in their face as well. And then underlying all of this, chances are high that there's also some physiological arousal or physiological escalation taking place. So that can look like raised voices, aggressive behavior and posture, if you're starting to stomp around the house or slam doors or just like take a little bit more of an aggressive stance, that's probably what's going on. If you go check out our episode 275, all about demon dance battles, we talk a lot more about what tends to motivate these escalation and these particular escalation patterns, because also escalation for some people can look like more withdrawing, right? That as the temperature of the conversation increases, the avoidance, the withdrawal, the desire to stonewall can also increase for some people. It's not always necessarily aggressive.
Yeah.
And then the last one that they mentioned in this research is negative attributions and dualistic thinking. So this boils down to vilifying the other person and portraying oneself as the victim or as the one who is under attack. And this could be behavior that either gets expressed verbally, right, in the way that you're conducting the fight, where it's all about you're terrible and you did this bad thing and like I'm the one who has suffered because of the thing that you've done and I'm completely innocent and I'm just the victim here, right? But it can also, and I think a little bit more insidiously, be just a mental stance that we can take during a fight, that the other person is the one who messed up and we're the one who's having to deal with the fallout of them messing up. And that's the only way that it ever plays out. And there's this quote in the study that says, over time, these attributions become rigid, redundant, easily activated, and difficult to extinguish.
So it's when those things become a pattern that then you get those habits sort of built in and it just instantly falls into those patterns again. That easily activated part makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, this is all pretty triggering.
Oh no, Emily.
No, it's okay. It's interesting that they found all of these things to be the case in high conflict, because it's absolutely true. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this are like, yep, I get into that spiral with a particular partner. And I think it's interesting because when you have multiple partners or when you go through multiple relationships in your lifetime, you can see how like some trigger this response and others definitely don't.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's really fascinating to, I guess, deconstruct and unpack as well. Like, what is it about a pair of people that causes them to go in this spiral versus another partnership that doesn't do the same thing?
Yeah. No, I think I shared about this way back in the early days of the podcast, because this happened like 20 years ago or something like that. But I had a partner in college, my freshman year, that we had, a very college-like relationship, which is, very explosive, I guess, in both in a good way at the beginning of like, wow, this is amazing. Oh my gosh, this is so cool. To then, a lot of conflict later on and then broke up. But we're all kind of part of the same friend group. It was a small college too. So, we're all kind of in each other's lives. And then maybe a year or two afterward, kind of reconnected online through instant messenger, just being like, hey, kind of reconnecting. And within maybe 30 minutes, like got into like an escalated disagreement over there based on total misunderstanding. But it was like those pathways were still so easily triggered that it was kind of that like, okay, we need to take a break from this. And so now, we're civil with each other online many years later. But I feel like even now I'm kind of like, yeah, there's something about the patterns we would fall into. Probably now, almost 20 years later, that wouldn't still be the case. But even a couple years after that relationship, it still was.
Wow, gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of neuroplasticity versus sort of like ingrained, very specific patterns that you tend to fall into regardless of the amount of time that's passed. I mean, that's very interesting to me. And I think that these tools require a certain amount of willingness to be able to break that pattern. And that's something that not everybody is willing to do. And so I hope and encourage all of you out there listening to, take a breath when you're in these situations, and we'll get more into some of that. But it can be really difficult to move past a pattern because that's all that you know.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
And
especially if you don't know how to identify it.
Yeah.
I had no clue that
Yeah.
was a thing to look out for. Maybe if I had, I would have seen it and been like, that's just that.
The more experience that I get working with couples, the more, I don't know if I'll stand by this in 10 more years. So take it all with a grain of salt, but at least where I'm at today, breaking a pattern, like it requires breaking in the sense of it requires effort and it requires will, and it doesn't feel good or natural or right. Like Emily said, this is what you're used to. And especially if you're in this pattern where you feel justified, where you feel like they're the one who's messing up all the time and I'm the innocent victim. And again, giving the asterisk we always have to give that it's like this doesn't apply to actual abusive situations. But yeah, breaking these patterns requires muscle building. It doesn't just happen overnight, and it doesn't just happen if you're waiting around for your partner to get their act together. Now, I wanted to go off on a very slight tangent that I think is still related. So I found this study published by Yeager in a Sociology Compass. It's titled High Conflict Couple Interaction and the Role of Relative Power. It was published in 2009. And I found this quote super fascinating. They say, quote, "People who expect that the other party will accurately understand their position and explanations are more likely to take pains to communicate in positive ways. Whereas people who do not think the other person is likely to accurately perceive their side of things are less likely to be careful in this manner. Sanford suggests that in cases where someone expects to be misunderstood, it makes sense for them to not be as cooperative since it may weaken their position but is unlikely to confer benefit. People seem to come to any given scenario with expectations of the other party's disposition and flexibility, and they then act accordingly. Expectancies can then, quote, subquote, become a self-fulfilling prophecy, end quote, as they can cause a mode of relating that may then, in turn, prompt the partner to behave in the manner expected in the first place."
Outer end quote.
Yes. The actual end quote.
Yeah, that to me is fascinating. That idea that if you expect to be understood, you're also going to communicate in a way that makes you easier to be understood and makes it easier to receive. And if you don't expect to, and I see Emily's face reacting very strongly to all of this.
And with that, we're going to be talking about a 4-step process that you can walk through if you've identified that you're in a conflict spiral. You're at the point where you know it's not productive anymore, and you're just like not entirely sure what to do. So, of course, I made a cute little acronym for it. The acronym is STAR, STAR. It stands for Stop, Take a Breath, Approach, and Refocus. And we're going to dive into each of those steps specifically.
All right, let's talk about the S of the STAR, Stop. So we are a big fan of the acronym HALT. It is in our book. We've done multiple episodes on HALT. We'll get into it more in a moment. But first, you just need to find the cue that lets you know that it's time to stop the pattern or to stop the escalation or any of the above, essentially, just to stop you from moving this train further on the track. So this is difficult because chances are high that you are in sympathetic nervous system activation or physiological arousal. You might be sweating a little bit or having some muscle tension or increased breath rate, increased heart rate. Maybe you're feeling like panicky or shaky feelings. You may have a blood boiling feeling or even literally have increased temperature. I think that this can manifest in ways like a raised tone of voice, or even your timbre changes, your pitch of your voice changes, and that shift in body language, I think in some extreme examples may happen. So you might be getting more aggressive, or you may be getting more avoidant. You may shut yourself in your room, for example, and not want to be around anyone for a while. You might even collapse. And you can learn more about these sympathetic nervous system responses in our episode Flight, Fight, Freeze, or Fawn, which was episode 316.
When you're in this state, your nervous system is focusing on survival at any cost. And so, unfortunately, you may not have the wherewithal to calmly or rationally call a pause on the spiral. And I think this is the 101 level of what keeps people in spirals, is that like when you're all hopped up on adrenaline and there's a part of your body that's convinced like you're going to die if you don't win this one, it's really, really, really hard to get yourself to stop or to pause, even if you cognitively know that it is the correct thing to do. And that can be very, very frustrating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's extremely important to find some kind of cue that is going to be the reminder to help you know that it's time to stop. And for some people, if you have good body awareness, it could just be all those physiological arousal symptoms, right?
Might take a little practice, but you could start to notice them sooner.
Yeah, you could notice, okay, I've got that blood boiling feeling. I can feel the temperature rising, or I can feel that my palms are getting sweaty, or something we've recommended on the show before, that you can literally check your smartwatch or your Fitbit if you've got one, that if your heart rate is approaching 99 beats per minute or it's above 99 beats per minute, that yeah, you're in physiological arousal in a flooded state. For other people, it could be remembering to scan for HALT, and again, we did a whole episode on this, and we did an extended version of the HALT acronym into HALT, so scanning of like, am I hungry right now? Am I horny right now? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Have I been drinking or using drugs? Am I sick currently? That's your cue to know, okay, I'm in a compromised state and I need to pause this for now. You could be scanning for the 4 horsemen behaviors that we've also talked about that comes out of the Gottman Institute. So contempt behaviors, criticism, defensiveness, stonewalling. I have some clients who, like, when their conflict is starting to reach a particular temperature and at least one of them is aware of it, like they'll play a particular pop artist that they've associated with it being an interrupt. And so that's their cue to know, okay, time to stop, right? And to take a little break. We've also in the show talked about microscripts that are like movement based, or it's just something that needs to tell you like, okay, now is the time that I'm pulling myself away. And again, like I was saying earlier about how if you're going to break a cycle, it's going to feel like a break, that this is going to be hard the first few times and maybe the first 25, 50 times that you do this.
Mm-hmm. I mean, for anyone who watched How I Met Your Mother, I think I've mentioned this before, but how Marshall and Lily's characters, they were the couple who had been together since before the show starts and stay together through the whole thing. But they're like the example of the solid couple, I guess, on the show. But they have a thing where they'll be in the middle of a fight or an argument and say pause, and then they'll both like instantly stop, be pleasant, go about their thing, and then like later that evening unpause, and then they're like immediately back into the fight where they left off. And while I think it's it's a silly little joke, I do think there's something to be said for being able to pause and learning that it's possible, but that you will still come back to it. Because I think sometimes that's the fear, is like, if I stop, we're not going to finish this conversation and I'm not going to get what I want, or I'm not going to get to express this, or it means I've lost or something like that. But to kind of develop that practice of, we are going to come back to this, but hopefully because you've regulated in the meantime, whether you meant to or not, you'll come back, not instantly back to it where you started, or, where you left off last time. So that's the part that's a little bit silly, because you'll actually probably come at it very differently when you come back. So when doing this, how do we communicate it? One could be maybe you both watched that show and you liked those characters, so you could try pause and just know that pause means we're going to regulate, we're going to come back to do this later. But it also could just be communicating very clearly of, I need to take a break. Maybe it is, my watch just buzzed because I have an alert set when my heart rate goes above 100 beats per minute that it'll buzz me. I had a watch that would, notify me of like, are you working out now? If my heart rate went above a certain amount. And if I was ever playing League of Legends, I'd be like 10 minutes into a match and it'd be like, are you working out right now? I'm like, God damn it. And so it would let me know, like, yeah, I'm reacting very physically to the stress of this situation, which is maybe not always the best. But it did help me be mindful of it. So maybe it's, my watch just went off, like, I need some time. Can kind of help make it a little external from yourself as well. It could be, I need 20 minutes to myself. Could be, this is getting overwhelming. Let's pause for a second. I'm going to take a breather. Or again, if you both are aware of microscripts and you can just have a quick thing you can say, or that song you put on, or a little dance, or maybe a hand signal that means time out, something like that, just to indicate, hey, we both know what this means. It just means I need some time and then we'll come back. The things to avoid here is trying to put it on the other person. And this is actually very similar to some of what we were talking about before of like, don't make up a story about the other person or try to tell them how they're feeling or what they need. Keep it focused on yourself. So don't say things like, you need to calm down. We should take 10 minutes. So that's generally not going to get the calming down that you want, actually. You need to stop right now. You're getting out of control, or just walking away in silence and slamming the door behind you. Ideally, try to keep this focused on yourself and what you need. And ideally, talk about this before you're in the situation. So your partner or friend or whoever this is has a sense of, okay, I know what's happening right now. This isn't just them saying, I'm not going to speak to you about this.
It's important to catch the ball here. And what I mean by that is that when someone makes a repair attempt like this, like saying, hey, I really need to take a break, or I need to slow down, or I'm getting overwhelmed, can we please pause? That there's also a responsibility on the other side to catch the ball, to catch the repair attempt that they have tossed at you. Because if your partner says that and you say, fuck you, no, you're not going anywhere, we're going to settle this right now, there's no point in making the repair attempt, right? Or, and so that's another thing that's going to feel hard to do. It also takes muscles, not only to learn how to make a good repair attempt here, but also to catch it. And we highly recommend that if you want to know more about repair attempts, because it goes beyond just the taking a pause thing, you can go check out our episode 288.
It's now time to move on to the T of the star, which is take a breath. So you've stopped, you've halted, whatever it is, you're maybe taking a breath now and time away from the intense situation that you were going through in that moment. So now it's time to soothe yourself. We recommend at least 20 minutes of soothing and no more than 24 hours before you come back and continue the conversation, hopefully in a less emotionally activated place. So ideally find something unrelated to the fight to focus on. So like a non-activating video game.
So don't play League of Legends, something calmer than that.
I was going to say like Stardew Valley or something, or like Animal Crossing,
Yeah, that's nice.
Okay, yeah.
Take it out on Tom Nook or something. You could do a physical activity, like some yoga would be great. I love doing yin yoga, like at the end of the night to kind of just wind down. And that's a lot of breathing and
For
maybe
me,
a
just
little bit
walking is my favorite.
Walking.
It's just to kind of like get some movement, get out of the same environment for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Maybe do something with your hands, like some yard work or some housework.
Yeah, Jace, do you remember the time? This was a couple of years ago. This was when I was in recovery from my big breakup, where I wasn't even in an active fight with the person that I broke up with. It was just me like ruminating and getting all activated and emotional and stuff like that. And for some reason I decided, like, there's like literally like 2 minutes before the three of us were supposed to have a planning meeting or something, that I was like, I need to go and break down all these cardboard boxes that are in our house. And you got mad at me because you're like, why are you doing this? Like right before our meeting. I was like, no, I have to regulate. I have to do this. And it did help.
Okay.
Well, that's good. I love it. You could go down like a favorite silly YouTube rabbit hole. Jace would probably say like he's going to learn a million things in this amount of time to emotionally regulate.
Right. Something like that. Don't watch like political commentaries or things that will reactivate you, but something that's just kind of fun, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also attend to your halt needs. So if you're hungry, make that happen. Make yourself a nice meal perhaps, or go out to eat. If you're angry, I mean, do all of the above to try to help with that. If you're lonely, ask for some cuddles maybe, or try to go out with a friend perhaps. Call your mom. Try to talk to someone just to, get it out, like attend to that loneliness. And then if you're tired, take a nap or wind down.
Important.
Take a bath. Yeah, exactly.
Ooh, a bath is a nice one. That is a good way to physically regulate.
I miss having a bath. I'm excited for Hong Kong when I get a bath again.
What we don't recommend during this time where you're soothing and taking a breath is using the time to act out and keep the fight going, even from separate spaces. Maybe this sounds silly, but I've seen it happen. I have done it also. So this is when like you take a break in name only rather than in spirit. So it's like you take a break, but you're still stomping or slamming around the house. You go to your room, but you immediately sit down to send the other person a long ass text message. Unless the two of you have agreed to this, I do think this can be a strategy where if you're verbally not able to make it work, but maybe it helps to have a little bit of an asynchronous messaging to help the both of you to calm down and choose your words a little bit more carefully. That can be helpful. But unless the two of you have agreed to this, I don't think now is the time to be drafting that. Or sitting and ruminating, trying to shore up your argument for when it's time to come back to the argument. Like basically anything that's going to keep you in this state is probably not going to be a very productive use of your time. The whole point of this time is to physiologically soothe yourself.
And related to that, when it comes to seeking out others to talk to, be sure to keep that in mind as well. So reaching out to someone specifically to vent or complain about the situation you're in can keep you at that height of activation and is just going to dig you into that farther, isn't going to relieve that. That said, seeking out support or advice from a therapist or someone that you trust can be helpful to get that outside perspective, but it might be better to also do that once you've regulated a little bit more, once you've come back to a little more balance, physically speaking. So just something to consider there, that if you are, for example, like Emily said, if you're feeling lonely, reaching out to someone can be really good, but I would recommend reaching out to see what's up with them. Like make it about connecting to that other person and not just, I want to continue all this stuff I'm thinking about, but dumping it on someone else, because it's not going to help you. And also isn't the most pleasant way to, get a random call or text from you as well. And then so with all of this, if you want some more ideas on what you can do during this time, we actually have an episode on that as well, which is episode 218. I've halted, now what? And we kind of go over some of these techniques in a little more detail.
And this next step is approach. This might be considered the step where you seek to not just self-soothe, but now you're partner soothing, or maybe you're coming together with the other person to co-regulate your emotions. But finding the right approach vector for re-entry can be difficult. As any sci-fi nerd should know, I'm looking at you, Jace.
So true. So true, right? If it's too shallow, you bounce off the atmosphere. If it's too steep, you burn up. It's a real problem.
Same thing can happen here. The same exact thing.
You're right.
Stakes equally high, for
Stakes
sure.
are high. I mean, I'm only half joking because approaching your partner again in an unskillful way can trigger the spiral to just suck both of you back in again. And I think this is why people can get caught in these cycles where they go through intensive conflict and we just sort of wait for it to peter out and wait for life to come back to feeling normal again, but we never really readdress it and we never really intentionally reconnect. And so then we try to avoid the conflict. Like these just not great feeling spirals, right? How I most often see this going down with clients is one person being ready to approach and the other person either pushing them away, avoiding them, and then the person who made the approach feels hurt and feels rejected, and then we're off to the races again. Or I see people reapproach their partner, but they immediately bring back content from the fight. Maybe they immediately bring in an attempt to justify themselves, or maybe they bring up the same exact criticism just in a slightly softer way before that person is actually ready to understand it and hear it. Or I've also seen it play out where the partner reapproaching is seen as, there's an opening in the defenses. And so then the other person doubles down, as in like, my partner comes to me and maybe they apologize for something they said or they did. And then I'm like, this is a good opportunity for me to really lay into you about all the other stuff that you need to apologize for, right? Or how much I'm justified and how much you messed up, right? So there are many ways to mess up an approach vector, but those are the ones that I tend to see. I don't know if there's others that you've experienced, the two of you, that come to mind.
Definitely been in all of those.
Yeah, I feel like they all fall into those categories for the most part. Of some variation on that. I think that the whole reapproach, if you come in opening with an apology, which we generally say is a good way to come back in, of like, okay, I'm sorry that I raised my voice or that, I got extra heated here. That if the other person sees that as like, if they were raised in a family where any apology means you lose, and winning and losing is what matters, not actually resolving anything, if that's what you were taught, then yeah, you might jump on that opportunity to say, aha, now they're showing weakness, it's my time to win, they're losing. That you can also get into that situation where if you've now associated your partner with doing that, you're going to come in with more of the aggression too, because you're preemptively expecting them to come after you. And so there does need to be some work on both sides of this. If that's a pattern that you have, it's kind of like you've even got to take an extra step back and work on just that first part first, of being able to apologize and reconnect for something. And that doesn't mean the argument's over. Like, the purpose of it isn't just to get the other to apologize and you lose.
With this approach, it's okay if it's a simple approach. It's really okay if you just say to your partner, I'm sorry that we're having a hard time right now. Can we sit together for a second? Maybe not even dive back in right away, just sort of sit together and be near each other. Or I want you to know that I love you and I want to figure this out with you. You could even just sit there, and it doesn't have to involve any words. It can just involve maybe closeness and touch, an arm around your shoulder or a hand on a knee, something like that.
I've definitely found this one to be very effective at times where, Dedeker and I have been a bit heated about something. And if we'll kind of take some time, or maybe it was just like, okay, we'll deal with that later. Maybe we're busy. But then the next time I have an interaction with her, like, she'll walk into the room and maybe I'll feel myself get a little tense of like, oh, are we still going to disagree? And if she'll like put her hand on my back or touch me in just kind of like a nice way, it's like I'll feel that tension just kind of instantly melt away. And then often I'm like, oh my gosh, I was afraid you were still going to be mad. And it's like, no.
Yeah, sometimes you'll collapse into tears.
Yeah, that happens too sometimes.
Right. Like as soon as I touch you, you're like...
Yeah, they're usually like semi-pretend tears, but it's like this, oh my gosh, I was carrying all this tension and worry about us fighting. Yeah.
Yeah, so my friend Catherine, who's a non-monogamy coach at Expansive Connection, from her, I learned this great phrase, connect before you correct. Now, I tried to look into this. Like she said, the phrase is not original to her. Apparently, it's come up in parenting contexts as well.
Okay.
You know, and I think this makes a lot of sense. That the thing is, unfortunately, sometimes in our relationships, we are in a position where we do have to correct a partner. Right? Like, that's totally okay. As in, correct them and teach them like how we want to be treated, right? Or like, hey, when you said this thing, it kind of hurt my feelings. Or, hey, actually, like, I asked you to do this and then you didn't, or anything, right? Like, we have opportunities for correction. And I hate that word correction because it just makes me think like you're training a dog. That's not what I'm trying to imply. But yeah, this idea that before you can bring a complaint, you do need to make sure that you're connected. Right. And that's why this kind of reapproach is so important, that you're reapproaching not to jump straight back into the content of the fight, but you're reapproaching to reestablish a baseline of connection so that both of you can feel safe enough to wander into that territory again.
And if you're not ready to be approached yet, or you find that your partner isn't, it's still really important to connect before continuing to step away. It's great to have that moment of like physical connection maybe, or even just, I love you, I care about you, I'm sorry, let's come back together when you feel ready to, or when I feel ready to. I appreciate you, coming to be close to me. I still need a little bit of time to calm down. Can you give me another hour or so? Or even if you're not ready to like touch a person, to be touched perhaps, you can say something like, I'm not ready to be hugged yet, but can you just hold my hand for a moment? Like, still take that bid to a degree, but you can do it incrementally, perhaps, not all at once, if you are not ready for it at that particular moment in time.
And now, step 4, final step, which is the R of star. So we've stopped, we've taken a breath, now we've approached, and then finally to refocus. So it's possible that just during that approach, you will have repaired the majority of what went awry. That maybe all it takes is just some regulating from both of you, and you might be able to continue on and not have to do a lot of processing together. This is particularly likely if you realized during your taking a breath step that it was because you were hungry, or you were tired, or lonely, or you were drunk, or something like that, that If that state has been fixed, that may be all it took. Maybe that's all you needed was that. So even that part can already be really powerful. And it may be helpful to table any further discussion for the time being and to just focus on the soothing and the connecting together. If that's the case, then it is good to be specific about when you will revisit the topic. So it's not just kind of bubbling in the back of your head as this stressor of like, oh, I don't know when that's going to come up again. It feels unresolved. Set an actual time for it. But then it could be right now, this isn't urgent, actually. We were treating it like it's urgent. Maybe it's not. Let's just take some time to connect with each other. As far as when to deal with that, it could be scheduling a specific time, like saying, hey, why don't we come back to this tomorrow after dinner? Or, we're going to see each other this weekend. Let's wait and talk about it then so that we can both gather our thoughts. Or if you're doing something like a regular radar that you have every month, and maybe it's, our radar is coming up in just a couple weeks. Let's just put this on our list. Let's write it down now so we don't forget, but let's talk about it then, because we'll be talking about a lot of other stuff. And so it'll be a good time to kind of figure this out and come up with solutions to try. That's one of the things I like most about Radar is it gives you an easy way to, instead of having to pull out the calendars and find a time, it's like, we've already got this scheduled. Let's talk about this then.
But if that's not the case for you, a good place to start with this refocusing step could be on finding just one thing that you can validate about your partner's experience or something that came up for your partner during the conflict. It does not have to be validating absolutely every single part of their feelings. It doesn't have to be agreeing with every single part of their take on the situation. All you have to do is pick out one thing, and that can be your opener. So, for example, something like, it makes sense why you would have felt caught off guard by me reacting as strongly as I did. And that could be it, right? Or I think that you're right to be frustrated by this situation. Or I know that you've been sad about this particular topic for a while. I really cannot overstate how this can be very simple because, again, if you're trying to break patterns, it has to be simple because you're not going to change overnight and you're not going to pull a complete 180. And you're also not going to be perfect. Like, none of us are perfect at this stuff, And so the more that you can make it simple for yourself, the better. And if it's just picking one tiny thing to validate as your opener, I highly recommend that. Also, you can go check out our repair shop tool. So either you can learn more about that. There's a whole chapter in our book dedicated to that, or you can listen to our episode, which is episode 234, titled Shop, How to Repair After a Fight. The super quick and dirty overview of repair shop is basically like you and your partner sit down together and you, again, go through a 4-step process where you get to compare, okay, what were the stories and assumptions that I brought to this conversation? What's the history here? What got triggered for me? You both have opportunities to take ownership of how you contributed to the conflict. And then you get to the end, which is the prevention step, which is about actually putting your heads together about how do we prevent this? How do we resolve this for next time? Again, none of these tools are perfect because every single person is an individual and every single relationship is unique. But we really do believe in trying to make these things be at least simple and accessible so that when you're in those moments where you just have no idea what to do, you're just in over your head or you're feeling really overwhelmed, you have something to latch onto to at least be a starting point for unknitting the spiral.
So for a quick review, remember, use the star.
Be a star.
Well,
Can we say be a star? I think be a
Well,
star.
okay. Yeah, I was really thinking, I was like, turn your conflict spiral into a conflict constellation. And then I was like, that's not it. And then I was thinking about the superstar thing and Mario Party. And then I was like, that's not it because I've gotten into the most heated conflicts of my life around Mario Party.
For sure.
I think Emily has sworn at me the most you've ever sworn in my entire life and the most aggressively over a Mario Party game. So that's not going to be a good one.
Surprised.
No one is surprised.
Well, be a star.
Well, is it okay? Hold it. Is it your guiding star, your North Star?
I like that.
This is your
good.
guiding star. That's going to guide you out of the conflict whirlpool.
Yes, there you go. Get out of the conflict whirlpool and jump on your shining star by stopping.
Okay, we're riding the star. I like it.
Okay,
That's
riding.
fun.
Yeah, I'm grabbing onto it and riding it into the sky.
Kirby.
There you go. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So stop, take a breath, approach, and refocus.
All right, folks, we want to hear from you. How do you know when you are in a conflict spiral? So if you go to our Instagram page, we're going to be asking that question on our Instagram stories, and you can answer it anonymously. Also, the best place to share your thoughts with other listeners is the episode discussion channel in our Discord server, or you can post about it in our private Facebook group. You can get access to these groups and join our exclusive community by going to multiamory.com/join. In addition, you can share with us publicly on Instagram at multiamory_podcast. Multiamory is created and produced by Jace Lindgren, Emily Matlack, and me, Dedeker Winston. Our production assistants are Rachel Shunowork and Carson Collins. Our theme song is Forms I Know I Did by Josh and Anand from the Fractal Cave EP. The full transcript is available on this episode's page on multiamory.com.